The alarm on my scanner screamed the moment my shuttle broke through the clouds of that dead colony world, and my hands froze on the controls because nothing down there should have been alive. My name is Cale Renwood, and I was sent by the Outer Survey Division to find out why a creature colony had refused to leave one single spot on this planet for 100 years. That was the mission brief. Simple words. But nothing about what I found down there was simple. The moment my landing gear touched the dust, I saw them. Dozens of young dragon-like creatures, scaled and quick-eyed, circling a small patch of stone like it was the center of the universe. They did not attack me. They did not run, they just watched, wings half open, teeth bared just enough to warn me not to come closer. I stepped out slowly, my breath tight in my chest, because these creatures were not supposed to still be nesting here. Every survey report before mine said this world had been abandoned, empty, forgotten. But empty places do not have guardians. I lifted my hands to show I carried no weapon, and one of the younger ones, barely bigger than a large dog, let out a low growl and moved between me and the stone behind it. That was when I saw what they were protecting. A grave. A human grave, weathered by 100 years of wind and rain, yet somehow still standing, still whole, as if something had been shielding it the entire time. My translator picked up fragments of sound from the creatures, a kind of layered song that shifted in pitch, almost like a warning and a memory at the same time. I had studied dragonkin dialects before, but this one was old, older than anything in my records. I stayed there for 3 days, watching, recording, trying to understand why an entire species would tie itself to one patch of ground for a century without a single one of them ever leaving. On the 4th day, an elder came, not one of the young ones, but a massive creature with scars across its wings and eyes that looked like they had seen more winters than my entire lifetime. It did not attack me either. It sat, folded its wings, and began to sing. My translator struggled at first, but slowly, word by broken word, a story began to form. 100 years ago, a human colony had been built on this very ground. It was not a grand colony, not a famous one, just a small research outpost with barely 300 people, studying the local wildlife, including a species of egg-laying creatures that the humans had only just discovered. Among those 300 people was an engineer named Colin Ashford, not a soldier, not a hero in any official sense, just a man who fixed machines and kept the lights running. The colony's power core began to fail during a violent storm. The humans evacuated fast, ships lifting off one after another, carrying families toward orbit and safety. But the nesting grounds of the young dragon-like creatures sat directly in the path of the coming meltdown, close enough that the whole clutch of unborn eggs would have been destroyed in minutes. Colin stayed behind. He was not ordered to. He was not paid to. He simply looked at the eggs, looked at the storm, and made a choice that no one asked him to make. He rerouted the failing core manually, redirecting the coming blast away from the nesting ground and toward an empty ridge instead. It worked. The eggs survived. Colin did not. The elder's song grew quieter here, and even through the broken translation, I could feel the weight of it, like grief carried across 100 years without ever fading. The humans who escaped never came back for the body. Space was vast, and the emergency evacuation left records confused, ships scattered, and priorities changed. Whether they forgot, or could not return, or simply never knew where he had fallen, I could not tell. But the eggs that survived that night hatched only days later. And something strange happened. The hatchlings, the very first dragon babies born after that night, did not scatter across the land like their ancestors always had. They gathered around the place where Colin had fallen, and they stayed. The elder explained, through slow, trembling notes, that among their kind, certain memories are not only learned, they are carried in the blood, passed silently from parent to child before the child even opens its eyes. It is rare. It only happens when something touches the deepest instinct of survival itself. Colin's sacrifice had touched exactly that. Every generation since then had been born already knowing, in some instinctive corner of their minds, that this ground held a debt that could never be repaid, only honored. No dragon parent ever taught this to its children through words. It was already there, waiting, the moment each hatchling cracked its shell. I asked the elder, through careful phrasing my translator could manage, why they never left. Not even to search for food farther away, not even during storms or danger. The answer came simply. A debt like this does not get paused, it does not get postponed. It is carried, whole, every day, forever, until it no longer needs carrying. I sat in silence after that, staring at the small stone marker that 100 years of scales and small clawed feet had somehow kept clean, kept whole, kept standing. Over the following days, I explored the ruins of the old colony, with careful steps, careful not to disturb the young guardians, who still watched me from a distance. I found old data drives, cracked, but still partly readable, buried beneath collapsed metal. Among the broken files, I found Colin's final recorded message. It was short, no dramatic music, no speech meant for history, just a tired voice, breathing hard, speaking into a small recorder while alarms blared in the background. He said he was sorry he could not save everyone. He said the eggs deserved a chance, and if nothing else went right that night, at least that much would. He said if anyone ever found this message, to tell his sister he was thinking of her garden back home, and that he hoped it was still blooming. That was it. No mention of bravery, no mention of legacy. Just a man thinking of his sister's garden while the world burned around him. I do not know why that hit me harder than anything else in the log, perhaps because it proved this was not some grand performance meant to be remembered. It was a private, quiet choice, made by someone who expected no one to ever hear about it. But something out there had heard it. Something out there had carried it, not in words, but in instinct, for 100 years. On my last day on that world, I watched something that I will never forget. A new egg, the last one of that season's clutch, cracked open near the grave. The tiny hatchling stumbled out, wet scales gleaming under the pale sun, wings too weak yet to open fully. It did not wander. It did not need guidance from its parents. Its small head turned immediately, instinctively, toward the stone marker, and it crawled toward it, curling up beside it, like it had done this 1,000 times before, even though it had only existed for a few minutes. No one taught it to do that. No one commanded it. It simply knew. I stood there with my scanner forgotten in my hand, watching a creature, barely minutes old, already carrying a debt passed down from a stranger's sacrifice a century earlier. When I returned to my ship, I filed my report differently than I had planned. I did not recommend relocation. I did not recommend disturbing the colony or removing the grave for study. Instead, I recommended the opposite. I asked that this world be marked as protected, untouched, left exactly as it was, a living monument, built not by machines or monuments makers, but by instinct, memory, and loyalty passed down through blood. Humans, in most star charts, are considered short-lived compared to many other species. Our lifespans are brief. Our empires rise and fall faster than a single dragon elder's lifetime. And yet here, on a forgotten world, most star maps had already erased from memory. One quiet act by one ordinary man had planted something that outlived him 100 times over. I often think about what makes a species remarkable. Some races are remembered for their wars, their conquests, their power. But this world remembers a name not from strength, but from the choice one man made not to run, when running would have been easy. Before I left orbit, I looked down one final time at the small green patch surrounded by young dragons, wings folded, eyes watchful, guarding something they never fully understood in words, but understood completely in the way that mattered most. 100 years without leaving, not because they were trapped, not because they were told to. Because somewhere in their blood, a promise still lived, whispering the same simple truth to every new hatchling that opened its eyes. Someone stayed for us once, so now we stay for him. And as my ship rose higher into the stars, leaving that small, quiet world behind, I understood something I would carry with me for the rest of my life. Some graves are not guarded by walls, or weapons, or laws. Some graves are guarded by memory itself, passed gently from one small beating heart to the next, forever.